Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Foundations. Nathaniel Nate Reynolds had built his life brick by brick, just like the luxury homes his construction company erected across New England. At 42, he commanded respect in Boston's construction industry. A self-made success who had started swinging hammers at 16 and now employed over 200 people. His calloused hands and weathered face told the story of someone who had earned everything through grit and determination. The February wind cut through Nate's jacket as he stood on the balcony of their Beacon Hill brownstone, staring at the text that had appeared on his phone by mistake. A message clearly meant for someone else had been sent to him instead. He's planning the Maldives trip for our anniversary. Perfect time to tell him. The sender, Vanessa Reynolds, his wife of 11 years. Nate gripped the phone tightly, his knuckles white against the black case. This wasn't the first suspicious message he'd intercepted. For months, small inconsistencies had appeared in Vanessa's behavior. Late nights at her gallery, unexplained weekend art exhibitions, and a growing coldness in their bed. Their story had once been the talk of Boston society, the rugged contractor who fell for the sophisticated art dealer. They'd met when Nate was renovating an old warehouse into what would become Vanessa's premier gallery space. Despite coming from different worlds, he from a blue-collar family in Dorchester, she from old money in Wellesley, they'd connected instantly. Within a year, they were married in a lavish ceremony that his family had found intimidating and hers had found quaint. Thinking about the trip? Vanessa's voice startled him as she stepped onto the balcony, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the wind. Nate pocketed his phone, just confirming some details with the travel agent. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Mom and Dad are so excited. It was sweet of you to include them. Sweet. That's what her mother called him at dinner parties. Vanessa's sweet husband, with a tone that suggested being sweet was a consolation prize for lacking pedigree. They've never been to the Maldives, Nate replied, keeping his voice neutral. I thought they'd enjoy it. He watched her closely, this woman who had once been the center of his world. Vanessa Matthews Reynolds, daughter of George Matthews, the banking executive, and Eleanor Matthews, the philanthropist. The golden girl who had shocked her social circle by marrying beneath her station. I need to finish some work, she said, turning to go back inside. The new exhibition is next week. As she walked away, Nate recalled how he'd first noticed the change in her 8 months ago, after Daniel Harmon's artwork appeared in her gallery. Harmon, the up-and-coming painter whose abstract canvases commanded shocking prices and whose carefully disheveled appearance graced local arts magazines. Nate had met him once, at a gallery opening. Harmon had shaken his hand with soft fingers and smiled with perfect teeth, saying how fascinating it must be to create with one's hands in such a primitive way. That night, Nate quietly went into Vanessa's home office and powered up her laptop. The password hadn't changed since he'd helped her set it up years ago, the name of her childhood horse and the year they met. In her email, he found what he was looking for. Dozens of messages between Vanessa and Harmon, evolving from professional to personal to intimate. And more recently, exchanges with her parents about Nate, the necessary divorce, and how Daniel would be such a better fit. The Maldives trip, the one he'd spent months planning as a surprise for their anniversary, had somehow become common knowledge among them. In fact, according to the emails, it had become part of their plan. Nate closed the laptop and returned to the balcony, looking out over the city he'd helped build. The city where he'd met Vanessa, fallen in love, and now discovered her betrayal. In the lights below, he saw his next steps with perfect clarity. If they wanted a surprise, he would give them one they'd never forget. Chapter 2, Deception. The following morning, Nate left early for his office in the converted warehouse district of South Boston. The industrial space reflected his practical nature, exposed brick, steel beams, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. On his desk sat a framed photo from their wedding day. He turned it face down. "Morning, boss," said Tricia Dixon, his operations manager and the company's first employee. A no-nonsense woman in her 50s, she'd been with Nate since he'd operated out of his truck. "You look like hell." "Late night," Nate replied, pouring himself coffee from the pot she always had ready. "I need to make some changes to my travel plans." "The anniversary trip?" Vanessa finally figured it out. Something like that. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. I need your help with something, and it stays between us. Trisha sat, her expression serious. What's going on? For the next 30 minutes, Nate explained what he'd discovered. Trisha listened without interruption, her face hardening with each revelation. Those pretentious bastards, she finally said. What are you going to do? Not what they expect. Nate pulled out his phone and showed her a webpage. Know anything about this place? Trisha squinted at the screen. Extreme Wilderness Experience, Alaska? She looked up. You can't be serious. Dead serious. The Maldives trip is booked under my name. I can change the destination. A cold smile crossed his face. I made sure the booking agreement gave me full flexibility. And you think they'll just get on a plane without checking the destination? That's where the deception comes in. Nate opened his drawer and pulled out 4 passports. His, Vanessa's, and her parents'. Remember when we took that group trip to Vancouver last year? I held on to everyone's passports for safekeeping. They never asked for them back. Trisha's eyes widened. Jesus, Nate. I handle all the travel arrangements in our marriage. Vanessa hates dealing with details. I'll tell them we're flying private, a special anniversary splurge. The flight plan will be filed for Anchorage with a supposed connection, but there won't be any connecting flight. And when they land in Alaska instead of the Maldives, they'll be met by the staff of Extreme Wilderness Experience. The booking's under my name, but I won't be there. I'll explain there was a last-minute work emergency. Nate's voice was flat, emotionless. They advertised their program as life-changing. 3 weeks in the Alaskan wilderness, learning to survive with minimal supplies. Trisha let out a low whistle. That's diabolical. It's just phase 1. Nate turned to his computer and began typing. I need you to find me the best divorce lawyer in Boston. Someone ruthless, discreet, and with experience dealing with wealthy families. What about her lover boy? This Harmon guy. Nate's expression darkened. I'm not done planning for him yet. That evening, Nate met with Anthony Russo, a former client whose security firm handled everything from corporate protection to private investigations. They sat in Russo's downtown office as the city lights came on below. I need surveillance on 3 people, Nate said, sliding a folder across the desk. Discreet, thorough, and legally defensible. I want to know everywhere they go, everyone they meet, and especially any financial transactions. Russo opened the folder, glancing at the photos of Vanessa, Daniel Harmon, and the Matthews. Legal boundaries? Stay within the law, but push right up to the line. I want leverage. Russo nodded slowly. This is personal. Very expensive. Nate didn't blink. Bill me whatever it costs. Over the next 2 weeks, Nate maintained a perfect facade. He played the devoted husband, finalized the Maldives travel arrangements, and even attended a dinner party at the Matthews-Wellesley estate where Eleanor Matthews had the audacity to ask if he'd packed his nice clothes for the trip. Throughout this time, Russo's team documented every meeting between Vanessa and Harmon, including trysts at his loft in the Arts District. They photographed Eleanor Matthews having lunch with Harmon, clearly plotting. They recorded George Matthews making calls about post-divorce financial arrangements. Most damning were the recordings from the gallery office, legally obtained through a loophole. The building was still technically owned by Reynolds Construction, with a perpetual lease to Vanessa's gallery. The contract Nate had drafted years ago included a clause about security monitoring. I thought I'd love watching her fall apart when I confronted her, Nate told Trisha as they reviewed the evidence. But now I just want to see her face when that plane lands in Alaska. Trisha studied him with concern. You've changed, Nate. No, he said quietly. I'm becoming who I always was beneath the man who tried to fit into her world. On the night before the trip, Nate prepared the final details. He arranged for his absence from the flight, claiming an emergency project meeting. He confirmed the Alaska booking and the private car that would meet them at the Anchorage airport. As he packed Vanessa's suitcase with entirely inappropriate clothing for the Alaskan wilderness, he slipped in one item she hadn't chosen. A printed copy of an email she'd sent to Harmon, describing how she planned to tell Nate about the divorce upon returning from the Maldives. Let's see how you handle the cold, he murmured, zipping the suitcase closed. Chapter 3, Discovery. The morning of the trip dawned bright and clear, perfect flying weather. Nate had arranged for a limousine to pick up the Matthews from their Wellesley estate before collecting him and Vanessa at their brownstone. As he loaded the luggage into the trunk, Vanessa chatted on her phone, presumably with her gallery assistant. Nate caught fragments of the conversation. 3 weeks, complete digital detox. Back for the opening. When she hung up, he asked, "Everything set at the gallery?" "Perfect timing, actually. Daniel's new collection arrives while we're gone, but Michelle can handle the prep work." Her smile was practiced, professional, the same one she used at gallery events when talking to potential buyers she didn't particularly like. The limousine arrived at their door precisely at 8. Nate helped the driver with the bags while Vanessa settled into the back seat, immediately texting on her phone. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to the Matthews estate. George and Eleanor emerged, impeccably dressed as always. George in his tailored travel clothes, linen pants, and a cashmere sweater, and Eleanor in a flowing resort outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Nate, darling." Eleanor air-kissed near his cheeks. "So generous of you to arrange this wonderful trip." George clapped him on the shoulder. "Fine thing you're doing for your anniversary, son. Very fine." Their performance was almost admirable. If Nate hadn't seen the evidence, he might have believed their affection was genuine. As they settled into the limousine, Nate checked his watch. "We're right on schedule. Did you remember to pack my sun hat?" Vanessa asked. "The wide-brimmed one." "It's in your suitcase," Nate replied, "along with everything else you'll need." The drive to the private airfield took 40 minutes. Nate spent most of it listening to the Matthews discuss their expectations for the Maldives, the restaurants they wanted to try, the spa treatments Eleanor had researched, the exclusive excursions George had read about. And the best part, Eleanor said, patting Nate's knee condescendingly, is that there's no construction to distract you. Just pure relaxation. "I'm looking forward to disconnecting," Nate agreed, meeting her eyes steadily. When they arrived at the airfield, a sleek private jet waited on the tarmac. Nate had spared no expense. The deception needed to be flawless. As they approached the aircraft, Nate's phone rang. He checked the display and frowned. "I need to take this. You all go ahead and board." The pilot greeted them with professional courtesy, taking their passports for processing, as Nate had arranged. Meanwhile, Nate paced near the hangar, engaged in an increasingly animated phone conversation. Finally, he approached the plane where the others waited in the luxurious cabin. "There's a problem," he announced, his expression grave. "The Williams Tower project. There's been a structural issue. The city inspector is threatening to shut down the site." Now, Vanessa's annoyance was barely concealed. "Can't someone else handle it?" "It's a $5 million contract," Nate replied. "If we lose it, I have to lay off 30 people. George Matthews straightened in his seat. "The responsible thing would be to handle it, Nate. Business first." Of course he would say that. In the Matthews world, business always came first, except when it interfered with their plans. "The pilot has your travel documents," Nate said. "I've arranged everything. I'll catch up as soon as I can, hopefully tomorrow or the day after." "But it's our anniversary trip," Vanessa protested, though Nate detected relief beneath her objection. "I know, honey." He leaned down to kiss her cheek. "I'll make it up to you." As he stepped back off the plane, he caught a glimpse of Vanessa already on her phone, undoubtedly texting Harmon the news. Meanwhile, Eleanor was whispering something to George, who nodded with poorly concealed satisfaction. The cabin door closed. Nate watched from the hangar as the jet taxied and then took off into the blue sky. Only when it had disappeared from view did he allow himself a cold smile. "Safe travels," he murmured. Back in the limousine, Nate checked his watch again. By now, the travelers would have settled in for the long flight. The pilot, a former military man who owed Nate a favor, would announce they were heading to Dubai for a refueling stop before continuing to the Maldives. In reality, they were flying directly to Anchorage. Nate's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Package delivered to studio, as requested." Perfect timing. Daniel Harmon would be receiving his own surprise right about now. As the limousine returned to the city, Nate directed the driver to take him not home, but to a different address. A waterfront property in Marblehead he'd purchased through a shell company 6 months earlier, when he'd first suspected Vanessa's infidelity. Standing on the deck overlooking the ocean, Nate made one final call. "It's done," he told Trisha. "They're in the air." And the lover boy? About to discover that his upcoming exhibition has been canceled. Permanently. Nate ended the call and looked out at the vast Atlantic. In approximately 10 hours, a plane would land in Anchorage, Alaska. 3 very surprised people would disembark, expecting tropical warmth and finding Arctic chill. They would be met by the staff of Extreme Wilderness Experience, who would inform them of their 3-week survival course, prepaid, non-refundable, and beginning immediately. And somewhere in Boston, Daniel Harmon would be staring at the ashes of his life's work. Every canvas for his breakthrough exhibition mysteriously destroyed in a studio accident. This was just the beginning. Nate Reynolds was a builder by nature, but what he was constructing now wasn't a home or an office tower. It was something far more intricate and devastating. The complete dismantling of everyone who had betrayed him. Chapter 4. Stranded. 10 hours into the flight, Vanessa Reynolds stared out the window at the landscape below, a growing sense of unease gnawing at her. The endless white expanse stretching beneath them looked nothing like the tropical approach to the Maldives she'd researched. "Excuse me," she called to the pilot, who had just emerged from the cockpit. "There seems to be some confusion. Why are we flying over snow?" The pilot, a stoic man named Captain Walsh, approached with a neutral expression. "We're beginning our descent into Anchorage, Mrs. Reynolds. We should be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. "Anchorage," Eleanor Matthews interrupted, setting aside her magazine. "As in Alaska? There must be some mistake. We're going to the Maldives." "No mistake, ma'am. My flight plan is for Anchorage, Alaska. Final destination." George Matthews unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, his face flushing with anger. "This is absurd. I demand you contact air traffic control immediately and redirect to our proper destination." "I'm afraid that's not possible, sir. We have clearance to land in Anchorage, sufficient fuel for Anchorage, and no flight plan for anywhere else." Captain Walsh remained impassive. "Please return to your seat for landing. I want to speak to my husband," Vanessa demanded, pulling out her phone only to find no signal. "Why isn't there service?" "Satellite phones only work in certain regions, Mrs. Reynolds. Your husband was quite specific about the communications blackout during this trip." The pilot returned to the cockpit, closing the door firmly behind him. The 3 passengers exchanged bewildered looks as the reality of their situation began to sink in. "This is Nate's doing," Vanessa whispered, her hand trembling slightly. "He knows." 20 minutes later, the plane touched down at a small private airfield outside Anchorage. Through the windows, they could see a rugged-looking group waiting beside 2 heavy-duty vehicles emblazoned with the logo, Extreme Wilderness Experience. As the aircraft door opened, a blast of frigid air rushed into the cabin. Standing at the bottom of the stairs was a muscular woman with a weather-beaten face and short salt and pepper hair. "Welcome to Alaska," she called up cheerfully. "I'm Rita Blackburn, your chief instructor. We've been expecting you." Vanessa descended the stairs first, hugging herself against the cold in her light resort wear. "There's been a terrible mistake. We're supposed to be going to the Maldives." Rita consulted a clipboard. "I have a booking here for Reynolds' party, 3-week extreme survival course, premium package, all fees paid in advance." She looked up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No mistakes on our end." George Matthews stormed down the stairs, his face purple with rage. "Listen here. I am George Matthews of Matthews Financial. There has clearly been a misunderstanding, and we need immediate transportation back to the airport." "That won't be possible, Mr. Matthews," Rita replied calmly. "The pilot has already filed his departure plan. Besides, there are no commercial flights out until Tuesday, and our location is a 3-hour drive from the main airport." Eleanor Matthews emerged last, visibly shivering. "This is outrageous. We'll sue. You're welcome to contact your attorney when you return in 3 weeks, Rita said, gesturing to her team to retrieve the luggage. "Now, we should get moving before the weather turns. The forecast calls for heavy snow tonight." As if on cue, the jet engines roared to life behind them. They turned to see Captain Walsh, giving them a mock salute from the cockpit before beginning to taxi away. "Wait," Vanessa called futilely. "Your husband left specific instructions," Rita explained, guiding them toward the waiting vehicles. "He said you were all in desperate need of a digital detox and some real-world challenges. He mentioned it was a life-changing surprise for your anniversary." The implications of the situation were sinking in. Vanessa felt her stomach lurch as she recalled the text she'd accidentally sent to Nate weeks ago. "He planned this," she whispered. "He planned all of this." As they were loaded into the rugged vehicles, Rita handed each of them a thick envelope. "Your husband left these for you. Suggested you read them once we reach base camp. Back in Boston, Nate sat in Daniel Harmon's art studio, surrounded by the charred remains of what had once been the painter's masterworks. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, mingling with the chemical scents of paint and turpentine. Across from him, Harmon paced like a caged animal, his carefully cultivated artistic appearance now genuinely disheveled. Do you have any idea what you've done? Harmon's voice cracked with desperation. That collection was my breakthrough. 3 years of work, gone. Tragic accident, Nate replied, sipping from a tumbler of bourbon he'd brought with him. Electrical fire while you were out. Could happen to anyone. This wasn't an accident, Harmon spat. And we both know it. Nate set down his glass and stood, using his height advantage to tower over the shorter man. Prove it. Where's Vanessa? I need to talk to her. Vanessa's unavailable. She's on a special trip I arranged. Nate circled the studio, examining the charred frames. Somewhere cold. Isolated. Character building. Understanding dawned on Harmon's face. You know about us. I know everything. Nate pulled out his phone and showed Harmon a series of photos. Him and Vanessa together in various compromising situations. Him meeting with the Matthews. The contents of emails exchanged between all parties. I know about the plan to blindside me after the Maldives trip. I know about George Matthews' promise to set you up with a proper gallery after the divorce. Harmon paled. Listen, Reynolds. No, you listen. Nate's voice remained eerily calm. Right now, Vanessa and her parents are beginning what the brochure describes as the most challenging 3 weeks of their lives. When they return, if they return, they'll find their comfortable world has changed substantially. What do you want from me? Harmon asked, his artistic bravado completely evaporated. I want you to experience what it feels like to lose everything you've worked for. Nate gestured to the destroyed canvases. This is just the beginning. These paintings were worth millions. My career. Should have thought about that before you decided to take something of mine. Nate moved to the door. Oh, and you might want to check your bank accounts. Seems there's been some unusual activity. As he left the studio, Nate could hear Harmon frantically dialing his phone. By tomorrow, the artist would discover that his accounts had been drained. Legally, through a series of transactions he had authorized when he signed what he thought was a routine gallery insurance form. In reality, it had been a power of attorney document, slipped among legitimate papers by one of Russo's associates. Meanwhile, in Alaska, Vanessa and the Matthews had arrived at the Extreme Wilderness Experience Base Camp, a collection of sparse wooden cabins nestled in a remote valley surrounded by towering pine trees and snow-covered mountains. Your accommodations, Rita announced, pointing to a particularly small cabin separate from the others. 1 room, 3 cots. Outhouse is behind the main lodge. Outhouse. Eleanor repeated weakly. You can't be serious. Very serious, Mrs. Matthews. Now, you should change into something more suitable. Your current attire is inappropriate. She gestured to a collection of rugged clothing laid out on the cots. These should fit. Left alone in the cabin, the 3 opened their envelopes with trembling hands. Inside each was a letter on Reynolds' construction letterhead. Vanessa read hers aloud, her voice shaking. Dearest wife, by now you've realized this isn't the Maldives. Surprise. While you enjoy the bracing Alaskan air, I'll be busy with some paperwork. Divorce papers, specifically. Don't worry about Daniel. I'm keeping him company in Boston. I've paid for the full 3-week experience. No refunds, no early departures. The staff has been instructed not to allow phone calls or outside contact until the program concludes. Consider it a chance to reconsider your choices. I've included a copy of your text message about taking your new boyfriend instead. Thought it might provide some interesting reading material during the long, cold nights ahead. Happy anniversary, Nate. P.S. I packed your sun hat, as requested. Might want to use it to start a fire. George and Eleanor's letters contained similar messages, along with printed copies of their incriminating emails. As the reality of their situation settled in, the temperature outside dropped further, and the first flakes of the promised snowstorm began to fall. Chapter 5. Consequences. On day 3 of what Vanessa had begun to call their Alaskan nightmare, she stood shivering beside a half-frozen stream, attempting to fill a canteen with drinkable water while wearing 4 layers of clothing. Remember to filter it through the cloth first, instructed Kevin, one of the wilderness guides, who seemed to take particular pleasure in watching the three city dwellers struggle with basic survival tasks. Unless you want beaver fever. This is inhumane, Eleanor complained from behind her, where she was supposed to be gathering kindling. In 3 days, her perfectly manicured nails had broken, her expensive face creams had frozen solid, and her dignity had eroded with each trip to the outhouse in the middle of the night. Your husband paid extra for the authentic experience, Kevin replied cheerfully. No electricity, no running water, minimal supplies. He specifically requested we don't go easy on you. George Matthews stumbled up to them, dragging a small log he'd been tasked with retrieving for the evening fire. At 65, the banking executive had never done physical labor beyond swinging a golf club. Now his face was perpetually red from exertion, and his designer glasses had been repaired with duct tape after breaking on the first day. I'll sue that construction thug into oblivion when we get back, he wheezed, dropping the log. Kidnapping, false imprisonment. You came voluntarily, Kevin reminded him. Signed all the waivers through your son-in-law's office. Legally, you're here by choice. We were deceived, Eleanor snapped. Kevin shrugged. Domestic disputes aren't my department. I'm just here to make sure you don't die in the wilderness. He checked his watch. You've got 1 hour to get that fire started and cook your lunch, or you'll miss the afternoon training session on identifying edible plants. As Kevin walked away, Vanessa felt tears of frustration freezing on her cheeks. Her thoughts turned to Daniel. Had he tried to contact her? Did he know what Nate had done? Was he working to get them out? What she couldn't know was that at that very moment, Daniel Harmon was sitting in an interview room at the Boston Police Department, answering questions about a series of art forgeries that had mysteriously come to light. Mr. Harmon, Detective Lopez said, sliding photographs across the table. We have evidence that at least 12 paintings sold through the Matthews Gallery over the past 2 years were forgeries. Very good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. That's impossible, Harmon protested weakly. I authenticated those works myself. Yes, that's what concerns us. Lopez opened a file, especially since 4 of them were supposedly from artists who have confirmed they never created such works. There must be some mistake. The only mistake, Mr. Harmon, was assuming no one would notice. Lopez leaned forward. We've frozen your assets pending investigation, and we'll need access to your studio. The gallery owner, Mrs. Reynolds, will be questioned when she returns from her trip. As Harmon's world collapsed around him, Nate was meeting with Gloria Watkins, Boston's most feared divorce attorney, in her downtown office. You've been busy, Watkins remarked, reviewing the evidence Nate had compiled. Very thorough. The adultery is well documented, and these financial records. She raised an eyebrow. Interesting how funds from the gallery were being diverted to set up Mr. Harmon with his own space. Vanessa used company funds, our joint business, to finance her lover's career, Nate confirmed. Without my knowledge or consent. And your in-laws? Active participants in the deception. They've made no secret of their desire to see the marriage end and their daughter paired with someone more suitable for their social circle. Watkins nodded thoughtfully. Given Massachusetts' equitable distribution laws and the evidence of marital misconduct, we're in a strong position. I assume you want to move quickly. File immediately, Nate instructed. I want the papers waiting when they return from Alaska. And the gallery? It's on property I own, operated as a subsidiary of Reynolds Construction. I want it closed, effective immediately. Consider it done. Watkins made a note. What about the personal residence? I've already relocated to a new property. She can have the brownstone, after paying fair market value for my half. As Nate left Watkins' office, his phone rang with a call from Anthony Russo. We've got movement on the financial front, Russo reported. George Matthews is trying to access his emergency funds, but he's having trouble without cell service. Had to use the satellite phone at the base camp, which we're monitoring as requested. And he's discovering some irregularities with his accounts. Nothing illegal, of course. Just some poorly timed investments and unfortunate market movements. Nate smiled coldly. How unfortunate. Let's just say his portfolio has taken a significant hit. The kind that might force a man of his position to consider early retirement. This was the beauty of George Matthews' downfall. It was entirely self-inflicted. After obtaining power of attorney through legal if deceptive means, Nate had simply given Matthews' financial advisor some updated instructions about risk tolerance. The resulting investments weren't fraudulent or illegal, just spectacularly ill-advised given current market conditions. Keep me updated, Nate said. And what about the gallery staff? All terminated this morning, as instructed. The official reason is financial restructuring. They've been given generous severance packages on the condition they sign the confidentiality agreements. And the gallery contents? Being moved to secure storage as we speak, including all of Mr. Harmon's remaining works, which are now technically evidence in a criminal investigation. Back in Alaska, Vanessa and her parents had just completed a grueling 5-mile hike through snow-covered terrain to reach a checkpoint where they were supposed to build a shelter for the night. All three were exhausted, hungry, and increasingly desperate. "I can't do this anymore," Eleanor sobbed, collapsing onto a fallen log. Her once perfect hair hung in greasy strands, and her expensive face had been ravaged by wind and cold. "We could die out here." "We're not going to die," Rita assured her with clinical detachment, "though you might wish you could by day 10. George had developed a persistent cough that worried Vanessa. Her father, for all his bluster and social power, was being reduced to a frail old man before her eyes. "My father needs medical attention," she told Rita privately. "This has gone far enough." "He was examined by our medic this morning," Rita replied. "It's a standard cold, not hypothermia or pneumonia. He'll survive." "You don't understand. My husband, he's punishing us, but this is extreme. My father's health. Your husband paid triple our normal rate with specific instructions. No early release unless there's life-threatening danger." Rita's expression softened slightly. "Look, I don't know what happened between you all, but in my experience, people don't arrange something like this without serious provocation." Vanessa fell silent, the weight of her actions finally beginning to sink in. She'd been so convinced that Daniel was her artistic soulmate, that Nate had never truly understood her world, that divorce was the only way forward. With her parents' encouragement, she'd convinced herself that Nate would accept the settlement they'd planned, too busy with his construction empire to fight for a marriage that had cooled. Now, shivering in the Alaskan wilderness, she was seeing a side of Nathaniel Reynolds she'd never encountered in their 11 years together. Calculating, patient, and utterly merciless. That evening, huddled in their makeshift shelter as temperatures dropped below freezing, Vanessa finally confronted her parents. "This is our fault," she said, watching her breath form clouds in the frigid air. "We underestimated him." "Nonsense," George replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "He's just a thug with money. Once we're back in Boston, my lawyers will." "Well, what, Dad? Sue him for sending us on a trip he paid for? For giving us exactly what the brochure promised?" Vanessa pulled her knees to her chest. "He has evidence of everything. The affair, your meetings with Daniel, the plans for the divorce. He's had it for months and said nothing. Just planned this." Eleanor's face crumpled. "But why go to such extremes? Normal people just file for divorce." "Nate isn't normal people," Vanessa replied quietly. "He's a man who built an empire from nothing, who fought for everything he has. We treated him like he was beneath us, and now he's showing us exactly who he really is." As they lapsed into uneasy silence, broken only by George's coughing, Vanessa realized with growing dread that their current discomfort might be just the beginning of Nate's retribution. Chapter 6. Ruins. The Boston arts community was abuzz with gossip. The sudden closure of the prestigious Matthews Gallery, the mysterious destruction of Daniel Harmon's highly anticipated new collection, and the artist's subsequent questioning by police had created a perfect storm of scandal. Nate sat at a corner table in an upscale restaurant, listening as Tricia reported the latest developments. Harmon's been released on bail, but the forgery investigation is gaining momentum. 3 more galleries have come forward with concerns about pieces he authenticated. She sipped her wine. "And your in-law's social circle is starting to ask questions about their mysterious, extended wilderness retreat. Any attempts to make contact?" "None successful. Your friend at the wilderness camp is maintaining the communications blackout as agreed." Day 10 of 21. Nate nodded, checking his watch. "And the brownstone?" "Packed up as instructed. All your personal items have been moved to the Marblehead house. The art collection has been appraised and documented for the divorce proceedings." The waiter approached with their entrees. Once he'd departed, Nate continued, "What about the foundation accounts?" Eleanor Matthews' charitable foundation had been her pride and joy, and a significant tax shelter for the family's wealth. Through a complex series of legal maneuvers, Nate had managed to trigger an IRS audit of the foundation's activities over the past 5 years. The audit begins next week, Tricia confirmed. The accountant you recommended found some concerning irregularities in how funds were allocated. Nothing illegal, I trust, Nate said with a mirthless smile. Of course not. Just enough discrepancies to warrant a thorough investigation and possibly some significant penalties. As they ate, Nate felt no satisfaction, only a cold determination to see his plan through to completion. The man who had once loved Vanessa was gone, replaced by someone who viewed her betrayal as a business problem to be solved with ruthless efficiency. There's one more thing, Tricia said hesitantly. Daniel Harmon tried to access the gallery last night. Security caught him attempting to break in. Nate raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Did they call the police? No. As instructed, they escorted him off the property with a warning. He was unstable, ranting about artwork that belongs to him. Technically, all artwork in that gallery became collateral for the business loans when Vanessa restructured the financing last year. Nate took a sip of his bourbon, a detail she may have overlooked when planning her exit strategy. In Alaska, Day 10 brought a new level of misery for the wilderness participants. A blizzard had forced everyone to remain in the base camp cabins for 2 days, with temperatures dropping to 15 below zero. The enforced proximity had frayed already strained nerves to the breaking point. We can't just sit here, George shouted, his face alarmingly red as he paced the small cabin. My business, my foundation, everything could be falling apart while we're trapped in this frozen hell. Vanessa sat on her cot, wrapped in blankets, watching her father unravel. The harsh conditions had stripped away his commanding presence, revealing the insecure, controlling man beneath. Dad, please sit down, she urged. Your blood pressure. Don't tell me about my blood pressure, he snapped. Your husband has abducted us, and you're acting like we deserve it. Eleanor, who had barely spoken in days, suddenly looked up from her cot. Don't we? Her voice was barely audible above the howling wind outside. We plotted behind his back. We treated him like he was disposable. Not now, Eleanor, George warned. Yes now. Eleanor's normally perfect posture had crumpled, her shoulders rounded with defeat. We pushed Vanessa to marry him because his business was successful, then spent years treating him like he wasn't good enough. We encouraged her affair because Daniel fit our image better. She looked at her daughter with red-rimmed eyes. We're not victims, George. We're getting exactly what we deserve. The blizzard raged on, matching the storm brewing inside the small cabin as years of pretense and social manipulation were finally laid bare. In Boston, Daniel Harmon was coming undone. Banned from the gallery that held his remaining works, his bank accounts frozen by the investigation, and his reputation tarnished by whispers of forgery, he had retreated to his loft, which was now strewn with empty bottles and frantically started canvases. When the knock came at his door, he assumed it was the police again. Instead, he found Nathaniel Reynolds. Come to gloat. Harmon slurred, clearly intoxicated despite the early hour. I came to make you an offer, Nate replied, stepping into the disheveled space without waiting for an invitation. A way out. Harmon gave a bitter laugh. Unless you can magically make forgery charges and financial ruin disappear, I don't see how. I can make the forgery charges go away, Nate said calmly. The key witnesses could recant their statements. Evidence could be re-examined and found inconclusive. Hope flickered across Harmon's haggard face, quickly replaced by suspicion. Why would you do that? Because I want something in return. Nate handed him an envelope. Inside is a confession, detailing how you and Vanessa conspired to defraud me and the gallery. How you manipulated appraisals to inflate the value of your work. How you planned to divorce me and leave me financially compromised. That's not true, Harmon protested, though his eyes shifted away. Doesn't matter. Sign it, date it, and have it notarized today. Nate checked his watch. The notary will be here in 20 minutes. Once I have that document, the forgery investigation will hit unexpected roadblocks. And if I refuse, then I watch you go to prison for art fraud. Nate's expression remained impassive. Your choice. 20 minutes later, Harmon's hand trembled as he signed the document before a notary who asked no questions and avoided eye contact. Wise decision, Nate said, taking the notarized confession. One more thing, you're leaving Boston. Today, there's a position waiting for you at a small gallery in Portland, Oregon. Very small. The kind that sells watercolor landscapes to tourists. You can't force me to leave, Harmon said, though without conviction. Actually, I can. It's amazing what people will agree to when facing criminal charges. Nate moved to the door. A car will pick you up at 6. Pack light. As day 14 dawned in Alaska, Vanessa woke to find their instructor, Rita, standing in the cabin doorway. Time for your final challenge, Rita announced. A 3-day solo survival experience. You'll each be taken to separate locations with minimal supplies. We'll monitor from a distance, but you'll be on your own. George, whose cough had worsened despite the medic's treatment, shook his head. I can't. My health. Already cleared with the medical team, Rita cut him off. Your locations have been selected based on your physical conditions. Mr. Matthews, yours is the least demanding. As they gathered their meager supplies, Vanessa felt a strange sense of clarity emerging through her exhaustion and fear. In the 2 weeks since arriving in Alaska, she had lost 12 pounds, all traces of her carefully maintained appearance, and most importantly, her illusions about herself and her parents. The woman who had planned to leave Nate for a more suitable partner now seemed like a stranger, shallow, entitled, and breathtakingly cruel. In the face of real hardship, Daniel Harmon's artistic temperament and her parents' social standing seemed not just meaningless but absurd. Before they separated for their solo challenges, Eleanor gripped Vanessa's arm with surprising strength. Whatever happens, she said hoarsely, when we get back to Boston, we make this right. We deserve his anger, but we need to accept responsibility. Vanessa nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks in the bitter cold. If he'll even listen. He won't, George said, his voice hollow. Men like Nathaniel Reynolds don't forgive betrayal. I should have remembered that before we started this mess. As they were led in different directions into the vast Alaskan wilderness, Vanessa realized her father was right. The man she had married, the man whose hard edges she had tried to soften with art and social refinement, had never been soft at all. He had merely allowed her to believe he was, until she gave him reason to show his true nature. And his true nature, it seemed, was implacable. Chapter 7. Return. After 21 grueling days in the Alaskan wilderness, Vanessa Reynolds and her parents emerged fundamentally changed. George Matthews had lost 30 pounds and developed a persistent respiratory infection that required medical intervention upon their return to civilization. Eleanor's perfectly maintained appearance had been ravaged by exposure and hardship, her hands now calloused and her face weathered. Vanessa hardly recognized herself in the mirror, gaunt, hardened, her designer clothes hanging off her frame. The private jet that returned them to Boston was not the luxury aircraft that had deceived them 3 weeks earlier, but a basic charter arranged by the Wilderness Program. Throughout the flight, they barely spoke, each lost in thoughts of what awaited them. As they descended toward Boston, Vanessa stared out the window at the familiar cityscape below. Somewhere down there, Nate was waiting. Not with open arms, she knew, but with the next phase of whatever meticulous plan he had crafted. What will you do? Eleanor asked quietly, breaking the long silence. Face him, Vanessa replied. It's the least I owe him. George, bundled in blankets despite the cabin's warmth, coughed painfully. Don't expect mercy. The plane landed at Logan International Airport rather than the private airfield they'd departed from. As they disembarked, weary and disheveled, they were met not by Nate, but by a young woman in a business suit holding a sign with Matthews Reynolds printed on it. Welcome back, she said with professional detachment. I'm Melissa from Watkins Legal. I've been instructed to provide you with these documents and transportation to your respective residences. She handed each of them a thick envelope. Vanessa opened hers with trembling fingers to find divorce papers, a restraining order preventing her from accessing the gallery, and a letter from Nate's attorney explaining that her personal belongings had been moved to the Beacon Hill brownstone, which she was welcome to occupy after purchasing Nate's half at market value. Eleanor and George received similar envelopes, though theirs contained different legal notices, documentation of an IRS audit of their foundation, evidence of financial irregularities in George's investment firm, and copies of their own incriminating emails regarding the planned divorce. Where is Nate? Vanessa asked Melissa. Mr. Reynolds has no interest in meeting with any of you, the woman replied. All communication should go through our office. They were directed to separate vehicles, George and Eleanor to their Wellesley estate, Vanessa to the brownstone she had shared with Nate. The drive through familiar streets felt surreal after weeks in the wilderness. The city seemed unnaturally loud, the lights too bright, the pace frenetic. When Vanessa arrived at the brownstone, she found it both familiar and alien. Her belongings were there, meticulously organized, but all traces of Nate had been removed. His books, his clothes, the photographs of them together, even the furniture he had preferred. It was as if he had been surgically excised from the space they had shared for years. On the dining table sat a single item that hadn't been there before, a framed copy of her text message about taking her new boyfriend on the trip, enlarged and mounted like a piece of art. Exhausted beyond tears, Vanessa sank onto the sofa and tried to reach Daniel. His number had been disconnected. When she tried the gallery number, an automated message informed her that Matthew's gallery was permanently closed. Meanwhile, in Wellesley, Eleanor and George discovered their own carefully orchestrated homecoming. The house was intact, but key staff had resigned, citing personal reasons. George's home office had been stripped of sensitive documents that now appeared as evidence in the legal notices they'd received. Most disturbing was the stack of newspapers and printouts left prominently on their kitchen counter, documenting the scandal that had erupted in their absence. Daniel Harmon's forgery investigation, the gallery's closure, and rumors of financial misconduct at Matthew's investment group. He's destroyed everything, George whispered, sinking into a chair. Eleanor, showing more resilience than she had in Alaska, straightened her shoulders. No, George. We did this. Now we need to decide if we're going to fight or surrender. In his Marblehead home, Nate watched the security footage from both properties on his laptop, observing the return of the survivors. There was no satisfaction in seeing their shocked expressions, their diminished appearances. He felt nothing but a cold determination to complete what he had started. They're all back, Tricia reported by phone. Watkins delivered the papers as instructed. And Harmon arrived in Portland yesterday. The gallery owner there thinks he's doing her a favor by sending a promising talent her way. She has no idea about the scandal here. Good. Nate closed the laptop. What about the Reynolds Foundation transfers? Complete. The scholarship fund for trade education has been established with the initial $10 million. The remaining assets are ready to transfer once the divorce is finalized. While dismantling his marriage and punishing those who had betrayed him, Nate had also been building something new, a foundation to provide vocational training scholarships for underprivileged youth interested in construction and trades. It was perhaps the only positive outcome of the entire ordeal. Keep me updated on George's medical condition, Nate instructed. I don't want him dead, just humbled. After hanging up, Nate walked to the deck overlooking the ocean. The waves crashed against the rocks below, relentless and unforgiving, much like the campaign he had waged against those who had conspired against him. In another life, he might have felt remorse for the scorched earth approach he had taken. But that version of Nathaniel Reynolds had died the moment he read his wife's text message. The man who remained was forged from harder material, capable of calculating moves and countermoves with mechanical precision. The next morning, Vanessa forced herself to shower, dress, and prepare to face the ruins of her life. The hot water and clean clothes felt like unimaginable luxuries after 3 weeks in the wilderness, but they brought her no joy. As she sipped her first real coffee in weeks, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Reynolds? A woman's voice asked when she answered. This is Gloria Watkins. I represent your husband in the divorce proceedings. I assumed as much, Vanessa replied, her voice hoarse. I've received the papers. Good. Mr. Reynolds prefers an uncontested divorce. The terms are outlined in the documents. They're generous financially, though there are significant non-disclosure and non-disparagement clauses. And if I contest? Then Mr. Reynolds is prepared for a protracted legal battle, during which certain information about your affair, your parents' involvement, and some questionable gallery transactions would become public record. Watkins' tone remained professional, but the threat was clear. I'd like to speak with Nate directly, Vanessa said. Just once. Mr. Reynolds has been explicitly clear that he has nothing to say to you. A pause. However, he did authorize me to arrange a meeting if you insist. on neutral ground, with attorneys present. It wasn't what Vanessa wanted, but it was something. When, tomorrow, 10 a.m., at my office. Watkins gave her the address. Don't bring your parents. After ending the call, Vanessa tried once more to locate Daniel. A search of social media revealed he had deleted all his accounts. The arts publications that had once celebrated him now carried stories about the investigation into forged artwork and his sudden departure from Boston. It was as if he had vanished or been erased. What she didn't know was that Daniel Harmon was at that moment standing in a tiny gallery in Portland, Oregon, arranging tourist-friendly landscapes on walls, a far cry from the avant-garde space he had commanded in Boston. The gallery owner, a cheerful woman in her 60s, had made it clear that his notorious, abstract period was unwelcome here. Customers wanted recognizable scenes, mountains, forests, coastlines. His new apartment was a studio above a coffee shop. His new identity, crafted through the legal agreement Nate had forced him to sign, included a clause that prevented him from creating or selling abstract art for 5 years. His signature style, the work that had defined him, was contractually forbidden. Each morning, he woke to the smell of coffee and the knowledge that Nathaniel Reynolds had methodically dismantled everything he had once been. Chapter 8. Confrontation. Gloria Watkins' office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building with panoramic views of Boston Harbor. Vanessa arrived precisely at 10, dressed in the most conservative outfit she could find among her remaining clothes. Her attorney, hastily retained the previous day, accompanied her with a briefcase full of notes but little optimism about changing the divorce terms. They were escorted to a conference room where Watkins waited, impeccably dressed and flanked by 2 junior attorneys. Notably absent was Nate himself. Mr. Reynolds sends his regrets, Watkins said without preamble. He's decided against attending personally. That wasn't our agreement, Vanessa protested. There was no agreement, Mrs. Reynolds. There was a possibility, which Mr. Reynolds has reconsidered. Watkins gestured to the chairs. However, he has authorized me to discuss any concerns you may have about the divorce terms. Vanessa's attorney, Martin Schultz, stepped forward. My client is entitled to. Your client, Watkins interrupted coolly, is entitled to precisely what the prenuptial agreement specifies, which is considerably less than what Mr. Reynolds is offering. Let's not pretend otherwise. The meeting proceeded with clinical efficiency, with Watkins addressing each point Schultz raised with prepared responses and documentation. The prenuptial agreement Vanessa had signed before their marriage, at her parents' insistence, ironically, to protect the Matthews family assets, now worked against her, limiting her claims to Nate's considerable wealth. The gallery, Vanessa finally said, cutting through the legal maneuvering. It was my life's work. The gallery, Watkins replied, operated on property owned by Reynolds Construction, with working capital provided by loans from Mr. Reynolds' company. Your contribution was primarily curatorial, which, while valuable, doesn't constitute ownership. And my artists? Their work. All artists have been notified that their contracts with Matthews Gallery are terminated. They're free to seek representation elsewhere. Watkins consulted a tablet. As for the inventory, items not involved in the ongoing forgery investigation have been returned to the respective artists. The systematic dismantling of her professional life left Vanessa breathless. As the meeting continued, she realized that Nate had anticipated and blocked every possible avenue of resistance. I need to speak with him, she insisted again as the meeting concluded. Not as parties in a divorce, but as people who shared 11 years. Watkins studied her for a moment before responding. I'll convey your request. That's all I can do. As Vanessa and Schultz gathered their materials to leave, the conference room door opened. Nate stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Give us the room, he said to Watkins, who nodded and gestured for everyone else to leave. When they were alone, Vanessa was struck by how unchanged he appeared. The same solid presence, the same intense gaze. Whatever transformation had occurred was internal, invisible to the eye but palpable in the cold distance he maintained. You wanted to talk, he said, remaining standing. Talk. Vanessa had rehearsed this moment during the sleepless nights in Alaska and since her return, but now words failed her. Nate, if you're going to apologize, save it. His voice was flat, emotionless. If you're going to beg for reconciliation, that's off the table. If you're going to threaten or negotiate, speak with Gloria. I just want to understand why you went to such extremes, Vanessa said. The Alaska trip, destroying Daniel's career, targeting my parents. It's disproportionate. A flicker of emotion, something like disbelief, crossed Nate's face. Disproportionate? You and your parents conspired with your lover to blindside me with divorce after I took you on an anniversary trip. You planned to humiliate me professionally and personally. You treated me like a stepping stone you could discard when convenient. His voice remained measured, controlled. I simply showed you the consequences of your choices. By torturing us in the wilderness, by destroying everything we've built. You weren't tortured. You were inconvenienced. There's a difference. Nate moved to the window, looking out over the harbor. As for destruction, I didn't destroy anything that mattered. The gallery was never yours. It was always mine, legally and financially. Your parents' social standing was built on manipulation and pretense. Harmon's career was founded on deception. He turned back to her. I just revealed the truth beneath the facades. Vanessa felt tears threatening, but forced them back. And our marriage? Was that nothing to you? Our marriage meant everything to me, Nate replied, the first hint of emotion cracking through his composure. Until I discovered it meant nothing to you. That's not true. I loved you, but over time you decided I wasn't good enough for your world, Nate finished for her. Despite everything I achieved, everything I built, I was still just the contractor who married above his station. His expression hardened again. I accepted the prenuptial agreement because I thought it proved I wasn't after your family's money. I overlooked the condescension from your parents because I thought it was their problem, not ours. I worked 80-hour weeks to build something worthy of you, only to discover you were planning your exit with someone more aligned with your artistic sensibilities. His calm dissection of their relationship was more devastating than anger would have been. Vanessa recognized the truth in his words, however painful. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now you sign the divorce papers, buy my half of the brownstone or sell it and split the proceeds, and we never see each other again. Nate checked his watch. I've allocated 15 minutes for this conversation. We have 3 minutes remaining. And my parents? Your father should focus on his health and preparing for the IRS audit. Your mother should decide which social connections are genuine and which were based on her foundation's checkbook. Nate moved toward the door. They'll survive, poorer and humbler, but intact. Vanessa stood, gathering her dignity. I never meant to hurt you, Nate. He paused, hand on the doorknob. That's the problem, Vanessa. You never thought about hurting me at all. I wasn't significant enough to consider. With that, he left, closing the door softly behind him. 2 days later, in the early morning hours, George Matthews was rushed to the hospital with pneumonia, a complication from the respiratory infection he developed in Alaska. As he lay in the ICU, Eleanor maintained a vigil at his bedside, her social circle notably absent in their time of need. Word of the Matthews' fall from grace had spread quickly through Boston society. The IRS audit, the gallery scandal, and rumors of financial irregularities had transformed them from sought-after socialites to potential liabilities. Invitations dried up, calls went unreturned. In the hospital corridor, Eleanor was surprised to encounter Tricia Dixon, Nate's operations manager. Mrs. Matthews, Tricia acknowledged with a nod. How is he? Stable, but serious, Eleanor replied, too exhausted for pretense. Are you here on Nathaniel's behalf? Mr. Reynolds wants to be informed of George's condition, Tricia confirmed. He's arranged for a pulmonary specialist to consult on the case. Eleanor blinked in surprise. Why would he do that? Because despite everything, he doesn't want George to die. Tricia's direct gaze held no sympathy, but no malice either. The specialist will be here this afternoon. As Tricia turned to leave, Eleanor called after her. Tell Nathaniel. Tell him thank you. Tricia paused. I'll pass that along. But don't mistake this for forgiveness, Mrs. Matthews. Nate doesn't do forgiveness. This is just basic humanity, something your family might want to reconsider. In the days that followed, Vanessa signed the divorce papers without contest. The financial terms were indeed generous. She would receive a one-time settlement that would allow her to live comfortably, though not extravagantly. The non-disclosure agreement prevented her from discussing the circumstances of their separation or Nate's subsequent actions. The non-disparagement clause ensured she could never speak publicly about him in negative terms. In exchange, She kept the brownstone, purchasing Nate's half with most of her settlement. She would have a roof over her head, but little else from their shared life. Meanwhile, the Reynolds Foundation announced its first round of scholarship recipients, 20 young people from underprivileged backgrounds who would receive full funding for vocational training in construction trades. The press release featured Nate with the recipients, his expression more genuine than it had been in months. As George recovered slowly in the hospital, Eleanor liquidated assets to prepare for the financial penalties they faced. Their Wellesley estate was quietly listed for sale, and staff were given notice. The Matthews' carefully constructed world was contracting around them, reduced to its essential elements. Daniel Harmon's story ended with whimper rather than the bang he had once imagined for himself. In Portland, he painted seascapes for tourists, signing them with a variation of his name to avoid connection with the Boston scandal. The forgery investigation had been mysteriously dropped due to insufficient evidence, but his reputation in serious art circles was irreparably damaged. Each night, he returned to his small apartment above the coffee shop and tried to paint something meaningful, something that captured the chaos and destruction of his fall. But the legal agreement he had signed prevented him from selling or exhibiting such work for 5 years, by which time, he knew, the art world would have forgotten him entirely. On the 1-month anniversary of their return from Alaska, Vanessa received a small package at the brownstone. Inside was a flash drive and a note in Nate's handwriting, "For your eyes only. After viewing, destroy." The flash drive contained video footage, Nate meeting with Daniel, offering him the choice between prison and exile. Daniel signing the confession without hesitation, agreeing to leave Boston, abandoning her without a fight. The footage continued with recordings of her parents discussing how they would handle Nathaniel after the divorce, how they would ensure he knew his place and didn't embarrass them socially. The final video was the most devastating. Daniel and Eleanor Matthews at lunch, laughing about Nate's anniversary surprise, planning how they would break the news to him after returning from the Maldives. The construction king dethroned, Daniel had joked, raising his glass in a mock toast. Vanessa watched the footage 3 times before deleting it as instructed. That night, she sat alone in the brownstone that had once been their home and finally allowed herself to weep, not for what she had lost, but for what she had thrown away. Chapter 9, Aftermath. 6 months after the Alaska deception, Boston had moved on to newer scandals, and the principals in the drama had settled into their altered realities. Nate's construction company continued to thrive, expanding into new markets across New England. The Reynolds Foundation announced a second round of vocational scholarships, doubling the number of recipients. In professional circles, Nate was respected and somewhat feared, a man who executed projects with ruthless efficiency and expected the same from everyone around him. Privately, he had become more solitary. His Marblehead home served as both retreat and fortress, its ocean views and isolation suiting his new existence. The man who had once strived to fit into Vanessa's world now created his own, defined by work and carefully chosen loyalties. Tricia Dixon had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer of Reynolds Construction, overseeing day-to-day operations while Nate focused on strategy and expansion. Her fierce loyalty during the divorce had cemented her position as his most trusted associate. "Richardson wants to meet about the Providence project," she reported one morning in his downtown office. "Says he's got concerns about the timeline. Tell him his concerns are noted, but the schedule stands." Nate replied without looking up from his laptop. "If he wants to work with Reynolds Construction, he accepts our terms." Tricia nodded, then hesitated. "There's something else. George Matthews passed away last night. Heart complications from the pneumonia." Nate's expression remained unchanged. "Notify accounting to send funeral flowers from the company. Standard arrangement." "Already done." Tricia studied him carefully. "Eleanor asked if you would attend the service." "No." The response was immediate and final. "Anything else?" Vanessa called again. 3rd time this month. Nate finally looked up. "The divorce is final. The NDAs are in place. There's nothing to discuss." She said it's about closure, not reconciliation. "I got my closure in Alaska." Nate returned to his work, the conversation clearly over. After Tricia left, Nate sat back in his chair, allowing himself a moment of reflection. George Matthews' death stirred no grief in him, only a distant recognition that a chapter had truly ended. The man who had treated him with thinly veiled contempt for 11 years was gone, his empire dismantled, his legacy tarnished. Eleanor Matthews would now face her reduced circumstances alone, without the husband whose financial and social acumen had built their position in Boston society. The IRS audit had resulted in substantial penalties, forcing the liquidation of most of their assets. The foundation that had been her pride was now operating under new management. Its focus shifted from elite arts to community programs. Later that evening, as Nate drove to Marblehead along the coastal road, his phone rang through the car's Bluetooth. The number was blocked, but he answered anyway. "Reynolds, it's me." Vanessa's voice filled the car. "I heard about Dad." Nate remained silent, focusing on the road ahead. "I'm not calling to ask you to come to the funeral," she continued. "I know better than that." "Then why are you calling?" he asked finally. "To tell you I understand now, what you did and why you did it." Her voice was steady, free of the emotional manipulation that had once been her reflexive approach. Not just the Alaska trip, but everything that followed. The systematic dismantling of our lives. "It wasn't vengeance," Nate said after a moment. "It was consequences. I know that now." A pause. "Daniel left Portland. Broke the contract. Last I heard, he was in Seattle, trying to rebuild under a new name. That's his choice. Mom is selling the last of the Wellesley property, moving to a condo downtown. She asks about you sometimes, how you're doing." Nate switched lanes, passing a slower vehicle. "Is there a point to this conversation, Vanessa?" "Yes." Her voice grew more determined. "I'm leaving Boston, moving to Chicago to start over. Before I go, I wanted to say something I should have said 6 months ago. You were right about all of it. We deserved what happened." The admission hung in the air between them, unexpected and unsolicited. "You once loved me," she continued, "and I destroyed that through selfishness and stupidity. I don't expect forgiveness. I know that's not who you are. But I need you to know that I understand the magnitude of what I lost." Nate pulled into the driveway of his Marblehead home, the headlights illuminating the modern structure against the darkening sky. "Is that all?" "Yes." Her voice caught slightly. "Goodbye, Nate." "Goodbye, Vanessa." He ended the call without further comment. Inside the house, Nate poured himself a bourbon and moved to the deck. The ocean stretched before him, vast and implacable, much like the emptiness he had cultivated within himself. Where love and trust had once resided, now stood a fortress built of caution and control. The months following the Alaska incident and subsequent divorce had changed him fundamentally. The Nathaniel Reynolds who had once sought acceptance in Vanessa's world was gone, replaced by a man who understood the true nature of power and had no compunction about wielding it. He had not merely survived betrayal. He had transformed it into a weapon and turned it against those who had underestimated him. The contractor from Dorchester had revealed himself to be a strategist of terrifying precision, capable of dismantling lives with the same skill he used to construct buildings. As he sipped his bourbon, Nate reflected on the symmetry of it all. His in-laws had always believed he wasn't good enough for their daughter, that he lacked the refinement and sophistication required for their world. In proving them right, by becoming the ruthless, unforgiving man they had always suspected he was, he had also proven them catastrophically wrong about his capabilities. The following week, Nate declined all invitations to George Matthews' funeral. Instead, he spent the day finalizing plans for Reynolds Construction's newest project, a trade school focused on construction skills, built on land adjacent to one of Boston's most disadvantaged neighborhoods. The Reynolds Foundation would provide scholarships. Reynolds Construction would provide internships and job placements. The cycle of building would continue, creating opportunities for those willing to work with their hands and minds together, as Nate himself had done. At the groundbreaking ceremony, a reporter asked if the project was related to his recent divorce from Vanessa Matthews, whose family had been prominent in Boston philanthropy. "My personal life is private," Nate replied with the tight smile that had become his public persona. "But I will say this. Every experience teaches us something, if we're willing to learn. I've learned the value of building things that last." The trade school would be named for his father, the plumber who had taught him to respect honest work. There would be no Matthews name anywhere on the building, no gallery space, no concessions to the world that had once judged him insufficient. In his Marblehead home that night, Nate received a final piece of news from Tricia. Daniel Harmon had been arrested in Seattle for art fraud. this time with no possibility of intervention or escape. The man who had participated in the conspiracy to destroy Nate's life had finally destroyed his own, through the same hubris and deception that had defined him in Boston. Nate noted the information without comment or satisfaction. There was no joy in the downfall of his enemies, only a cold recognition that the natural order had reasserted itself. Actions had consequences. Choices defined destinies. As he stood on his deck watching the waves crash against the rocks below, Nathaniel Reynolds understood a truth that Vanessa and her family had learned too late. In the architecture of betrayal, every structure eventually collapses under its own weight. The only lasting foundations are those built on honesty, loyalty, and respect, elements his marriage had ultimately lacked. He had not forgiven them. He never would. But in executing his meticulous revenge, in dismantling their world with surgical precision, he had found something unexpected, freedom from the need for their approval, their acceptance, their world. The contractor from Dorchester had built himself anew, just as he had always done. And this time, the foundation would never crack. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.